So our first paper today is going to be including everyone, everywhere.
Awesome. Great. Can you all hear me fine?
We can.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Great. Start my timer. Thank you all for attending this talk. My name is Danae Ford Robinson. I'm a researcher at Microsoft Research, and I'm going to be presenting this work done with my collaborators at Singapore Management University, University of Groningen, and IIIT Delhi, where we're understanding the opportunities and challenges of geographic and gender inclusion in open source software. So, the gender gap is a significant concern facing the software industry as the development becomes more geographically distributed. So, there's been wide reports of understanding the gender differences and how they may influence across regions. However, when we start looking at reports of open source, or we start looking at some reports of the digital divide reducing, we see significant gaps in how people have been tracking the trajectory of open source software over time. Um, Click. Okay. So we identifying that there's huge disparities across software engineering, but looking at beyond the software engineering, there's been increasingly more studies investigating the great differences of the digital economies and how that influences who engages and where they're engaging from. This begs us to really ask this open question. So if we're seeing how this happens elsewhere, this difference in engagement manifests itself in open source specifically. Um, so we're really looking at how we can answer these research questions through two approaches. One, understanding a quantitative approach of what's the gender and geographic diversity of who's engaging in open source over the past 5 years being 2014 and 2018 in its entirety. And then understanding qualitatively through our mixed methods approach, what factors are potentially contributing to the participation of folks on open source. So first, I mentioned before, we had a sequential mixed method study where we conducted this archival analysis using GHTorrent data, and we collected the region of folks and used the United Nations classification of regions and subregions. We also used this third-party tool, Genderize.io, to understand the binary genders of individuals, although we know gender is a spectrum. From there, we conducted a large-scale survey with participants ranging from regions, asking about activity levels, barriers, and their roles they see in technology. So next, I'll quickly go over some core findings for how people are engaging online. So first, for research question number one, we are seeing that, I'll skip a slide actually. We're seeing on the figure on the left, we're seeing that over time, there has been a significant steady increase of women engaging in open source. It's been a steady growth, but there is no strong correlation that we're seeing between geographic region. So again, being able to kind of have historical data to track this growth has been really helpful for understanding where are specific regions we can support. On the other side of looking at how people are engaging, we asked developers through their survey, and we learned a lot about how people are engaging, what are their core regions people are excited about, like what helps them contribute. But then on this other side, we're seeing that not the same attributes that encourage them to join are the same ones that encourage them to stay. So we're learning a lot about the reasons, the motivation. So being able to connect with others is not as of a significant factor for folks as well. It's also being paid. We're seeing that there's different region-specific motivations for doing that or for contributing. On the next slide, I'll cover a little bit about some gender and geographic specific callouts we want to make. So on the gender side, we're seeing that women developers have been really emphasizing the aspects of social aspects of how they engage with one another as one strong correlator or one strong factor for why they're engaging or how they're engaging, and what they find important. And we're also seeing that some of these social aspects are maybe more prevalent for other regions versus others, like Africa, for example. We're seeing something similar across geographic regions where we're looking at incentivized pay, where we're finding that being paid as a contributor is also more significant for regions within Africa versus others. And we're seeing women also care more about significantly being paid more than men have, according to our survey. As I'm closing, I wanted to really highlight out some really interesting findings about what ways people encourage women or encourage women to participate. We found that not everyone feels as strongly about who or thinking about inclusion in open source projects. So we find it very important to highlight that in this work. And we shout that out in the appendix as well, which I encourage you to check out. Our paper does highlight some core challenges and some core opportunities, and we've been able to figure out how to propose, based on our findings, what can better support engagement across gender and geographic inclusion, such as highlighting role models and promoting activities that are very visible for other marginalized contributors. With that, I'll close and I'll leave you all with the links to the paper as well as the archive data dump for you all to check out and replicate some of our study findings. Um, Thank you for the time.
Thank you for that talk. Our next talk is Assessing Practitioner Beliefs about Software Engineering.
And that's me. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Tim Menzies. I'll be presenting the work by my former student, Srikanth, who's now working commercially. This is work jointly with William Nichols from the SCI, and we're from the NC State. And we all have beliefs that we base our teaching on. In software engineering, we have beliefs that we base our technology choice on. We have many truisms in our field. And what we find is if we go to any serious study about those truisms is that they're usually quite biased. If you want to have a laugh or a cry, please go to the Wikipedia page of lists of cognitive biases. And there you will see literally hundreds of ways that people routinely get it wrong. So if we ask people how does programmer size or programming experience or programming language affects defects or production rate, or any of the issues that are hotly debated, we find all sorts of truisms that are not supported really by much in the way of evidence. We actually have a unique source of evidence. When the Software Engineering Institute proposed the personal software process, they engaged in a massive data collection program where for 13 years, 1,400 developers did the same 10 tasks in different languages, ranging from short to long, tracking themselves according to the personal software process. It was an afternoon lab. And this was all across 10 countries and many different disciplines. And these people collected 124,000 defects. So here's a data source unique, which is owned and operated by William. And William Nichols actually was there to collect all of this. So here we have a data source that is verifiable. We have the data owner. And so we went through all these beliefs in literature. We just kept finding them. And we have to say that every single belief just falls down. Like the idea you can have less bugs by switching languages just doesn't hold. Here's one that I personally made money of last century when I used to go around and teach people UML, if this is how old I am. The idea that object-oriented programmers have inherently less errors. There was a bit of an effect that more thinking before you start doing the work leads to less rework. And yes, we found some support for that, but that was an incredibly weak effect. Another one is the nature of expertise in our projects. The idea was that you're an expert if you had more than 5,000 hours of work or anything. We just didn't find that was true. Now, one threat to validity with this work is that we couldn't actually look up these hypotheses directly in this data. We had to use partial indicators. We used to say, well, here's the data we want to explore. Here's the data we have collected. We had to invent a set of partial indicators that, if this hypothesis were true, we would expect to see blah, blah in the data. And we had to look for that. So if you want to criticize this study, you can say the indicators we came up with were wrong. But we spent some time thinking about those. I think the sort of thing deserves more checking. A lot of our truisms are the basis of people buying tools or design strategies or even the teaching we do. And what I want to say more generally is most of our beliefs are just complete bunkum, really just complete bunkum. They really need to be visited more. So let's doubt more the beliefs we have in our field. Trying to connect this with the other talks in this session, trying to connect it, the best I can say is that there's a whole bunch of authority-based reasoning. I'm stupid, you're smart. I will exclude you from my community because you don't know these things. It seems to me it's mostly a power play, trying to, convince people of things you barely understand. And so when I think about some of the motives people have for excluding or including people in the community, sometimes I think it's actually a fear-based thing, because we really don't know what goes on inside software projects and what factors lead to these things. And so maybe we need to be a bit more humble. And maybe that's an opportunity for openness, that if we're more humble about what we believe and what we don't believe, we'd actually get on more. So that's my talk. Thank you very much. I'll be here for question time at the end.
Thank you. Our next talk is Socio-Technical Grounded Theory for Software Engineering.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be presenting a socio-technical grounded theory for software engineering. I'm Rashina Hoda. I'm an associate professor in software engineering at Monash University in Melbourne. And this is a general first presentation based on a TAC paper from last year. Cool. So STGT is basically a socio-technical version of the traditional grounded theory research methods that we've had from sociology for a very long time. Now, it is best used for empirical qualitative research studies that involve people and/or a consideration of human and social aspects in the context of technology development and use. And by technology here, I mean the kinds of technology that we get involved with in software engineering, AI, ML, it could be in human-computer interaction, information systems, and so on. Basically, these days, any kind of domain has some hint of technology in it. So if you're working in an empirical, primarily qualitative research study, or a study that involves qualitative data, then STGT is an option you should be looking at. So why STGT? We did have the traditional methods before. So my big proposition here is that socio-technical research needs socio-technical research methods. And to try and explain this, I came up with this socio-technical research framework. Of course, I'm not going to be able to go through all of this in 5 minutes, but I do encourage you to look at it in the paper. And for now, I will just highlight the ST in that STGT, which is socio-technical, which is what I mean by how human and technological interactions are so tightly coupled that when we study or investigate them just on one or the other, it does not make for a complete understanding and investigation. So we have to consider them together and holistically. So that then includes also the domain, the actors that we can study, which are software engineers, data scientists, or software users. It also takes a certain set of skills and knowledge base to be able to do this. And so that I highlight those in the paper as well. And then finally, the data tools are using traditional methods like interviews and observations and surveys, but also modern techniques like data mining and natural language processing, sentiment analysis, and so on. So I guess the good part about STGT is that it's one method. You don't have to go look at 3 different versions and then decide what you want to do. It is hopefully clear with the steps and procedures, and it's got inbuilt flexibility. So it's got, in many ways, the best of the traditional world, as well as advantages of the modern traditional research data tools and techniques that we now have available. Okay, so here is the method process diagram, because obviously we're engineers and we need a process diagram. So there's the basic stage, and then there's the advanced stage of theory development. Again, I encourage you to go and read through the details in the paper of how you can go about it. It is not super complicated, but I will highlight a few things today, which is that if you just did the basic stage, you would be applying STGT in a limited way, and that would be as a technique for data analysis only. So you can pair it up within, say, a survey study or case study, or any of the other studies we've heard about today in this session so far, and might be the other ones as well. So on gender issues or practitioner beliefs or any of that can be done using STGT for data analysis. Or you could then go ahead and do the advanced stage and then cover all the way through to theory development. So what the basic stage does is for people who are new to the idea of grounded theory to first experience it before you commit to the idea of theory development, which can be quite a complex task. So if it does not turn out to be your cup of tea, you can actually exit the basic stage, but still with rich descriptive findings that can be published. So we've got a couple of examples here of new papers that are coming out that have actually done that. But if it does turn out that it is working for you, you can proceed then to the advanced stage and generate mature theories from there. So it tells you exactly how to go about doing that. Now, there's also an SDGT evaluation criteria for two things. So one is the evaluation of the method application, how well have you applied it? And the other set is for the outcomes. So how do you judge whether the outcomes of your study, whether they're interim outcomes or mature outcomes, are indeed quality outcomes? So that's about all I have time for today. So please do read the paper in the TSC paper, and also watch out for the book that I'm still writing. It's been a while and do need to finish that. And get in touch with me at rishina.thoda@monash.edu or on Twitter, or you can find all of this and more, including videos, on my website, which is www.rishina.com/SDGT. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next talk is investigating user perceptions of conversational agents for software-related exploratory web search.
You are muted.
Okay. Can you all see my screen?
No. Yes.
Now,
Okay. My name is Matt Frazier. Title of my paper is Investigating User Perceptions of Conversational Agents for Software-Related Exploratory Web Search. We're from the University of Delaware. Web search is a very common aspect of software engineering day-to-day workflow. Web search can be largely categorized into two different types of search. Lookup tasks, which are basic fact retrieval. You can think of lookup tasks, or exploratory search, which are for more learning and investigative tasks. Lookup tasks are relatively easy to find information online. However, developers are often unsuccessful in finding useful information for their exploratory needs. Our research proposes the first empirical study for software engineers utilizing an open domain conversational search agent for performing exploratory search. So our open domain, meaning the back end of the chatbot is actually connected to web search as opposed to being connected to a database. There's some other similar research to ours. There's other supporting Wizard of Oz studies. However, these are for lookup tasks and ours are for exploratory tasks. And there's a variety of other chatbots in software engineering. So to determine the efficacy of ODCSAs for software engineering exploratory search, we posed the following two research questions. One, can ODCSAs help software engineers be effective in performing exploratory search? And two, how far does the current generation of ODCSAs go in helping software developers with exploratory search? To answer these questions, we conducted a Wizard of Oz study. We had two agents, a commercial state-of-the-art ODCSA, Blenderbot 2, and we had a Slack channel wizard that was managed by a human with some canned responses and internet search available. We've recruited 18 diverse college participants that held 1-hour sessions where there were 2 tasks, 1 per 30 minutes each, of the same exploratory search intent. And then we asked each participant to answer a post-study survey about their experience. The post-study survey was segmented into a Likert scale, interaction and usefulness-based questions, also had some open-ended questions and demographic data. We wanted to gauge the interaction of how human-like the chatbot was, the state of the art, and how useful was it providing information. For our results, in terms of interaction, the chatbot was widely received in a well way. Most people agreed that they could understand the agent can understand them. It didn't behave awkwardly or ask too many questions. In terms of usefulness, people also agreed that it was able to provide useful information. They felt like the agent helped them, and 14 out of 18 people thought that they would use the agent again in the future. To summarize, we can say that an ODCSA backed by a wizard was found helpful in gaining useful information for exploratory search tasks for software engineering. In terms of research question 2, we compared the differences between the state-of-the-art and our wizard. Nearly all people agreed that the interaction with the state-of-the-art was human-like. 15 out of 18 people agreed that the agent can understand them. They didn't think that the agent behaved awkwardly or asked too many questions. And however, 8 out of 18 people thought that the agent didn't really understand them well. In terms of usefulness, most people agreed that the state of the art was not able to find useful information. Only 6 out of 18 people agreed that. 5 out of 18 agreed that they only felt like the agent helped them. And only 4 would recommend using the state of the art in the future. So we can see that there's a large gap between the current generation of ODCSAs and what participants would want in such a conversational agent for exploratory search and software engineering. In the future work, we plan to extend our analysis to collect some more data of these sessions. We also have a lot of unanalyzed data that we're going to look at in terms of the search queries involved in our sessions, the task outputs, and then the conversation context itself. This research contributes 18 Wizard of Oz exploratory search dialogues for software engineers, as well as our post-study survey results, including the programmer's comments and the NSF for funding our research, and also the co-authors of the paper. That's it. That concludes my talk.
Thank you. The next talk is a project-based collaboration between software engineering and criminology students, building applications to understand racial injustice in the criminal justice system.
Greetings, I'm Monisha Pulimud.
And I'm Margaret Leger, and we're here to present our experience report, a project-based collaboration between software engineering and criminology students, building applications to understand racial injustice in the criminal justice system.
We'd first like to set some context before we dive into the details of the project. Both of us work at the College of New Jersey, which is a public, primarily undergraduate and comprehensive institution. Faculty are teacher scholars who share a commitment to liberal learning, and many of us integrate community engaged learning in courses at all levels across all disciplines on the campus.
And so within this comprehensive education, courses outside the computer science discipline are often perceived by software engineering students to be unconnected to their major, and they don't always comprehend how these topics are applicable. At the same time, students from non-STEM majors like criminology often perceive STEM courses to be too demanding or technical, and students have a low self-assessment of their ability to engage in STEM.
So to address some of these concerns, our colleagues Diane Bates and Kim Pearson and I received a grant from the National Science Foundation to study the efficacy of the collaborating across boundaries curricular model. In this pedagogical model, students in 2 courses from 2 disciplines collaborate with each other and a community partner on a STEM-focused project to address a community-identified issue. The intent is that students from both courses with diverse perspectives and disciplinary backgrounds will not only learn the STEM concepts more deeply, but will also learn how to collaborate and integrate concepts from their respective fields to develop solutions for complex real-world problems.
And focusing specifically on this collaboration that we're presenting today, the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that followed in the summer of 2020 deepened both Monisha and my respective commitments to making racial justice a focal point of our classes in the upcoming semester. Embracing the benefits of interdisciplinary project-based learning, we designed a collaboration between our classes and the local chapter of the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow, a community organization dedicated to ending racial injustice in the criminal justice system.
In our paper, we reported on our experience as we and our students grappled with the issues of racial injustice in the criminal justice system and taught courses that emphasize interdisciplinary collaboration with a community partner. We also highlighted the learning outcomes for students and faculty and recommended practices for successful implementation of this collaborative model. From the software engineering perspective, I wanted to compel students to thoughtfully examine the social impacts of the applications they build that inscribe and reinforce rational discrimination.
And from the criminology perspective in my penology class, I wanted to provide students with the opportunity to explore how computational thinking can be employed to address criminal justice reform. Ultimately, as articulated by one student, both classes learned that the fields of computer science and criminology can be utilized together to form solutions to important nationwide problems.
So the students did manage to meet the learning outcomes, and they, by developing a number of applications that are described in more detail in our paper. So we encourage you to go ahead and please read the paper.
And in terms of the student learning outcomes, students reported in both classes significant increases in their scientific skills, their computational thinking, and participation was associated with improvement in the scientific literacy of the non-STEM majors, the criminology students.
In this semester, Maggie and I just completed another collaboration with a different community partner, but this time in person. The previous collaboration we reported on was during the pandemic and purely remote. So in the interest of time, I will point you to some resources where you can find out more about the work related to the Collaborating Across Boundaries curriculum model. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. The next talk should be what makes effective leadership in agile software development teams, but I don't believe that we have either of the authors here. So I think we can already go straight to questions. So I think there are few enough people here that, and the raise hand functionality isn't enabled yet, that I think you could probably just unmute without me calling on you.
And can I just introduce my co-author Srikanth, who was delayed by a locked door and now has joined us. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Menzies.
That's not something you expect with an online meetup. So I was particularly interested in the last talk. I noticed you skipped over a lot of the slides because you were trying to keep in the time. Since we have this extra time, would you be willing to go back and show us a few other things?
Happy to. We can go back a little bit. Yeah. Let me just bring up the slides again.
I was particularly interested in how the two classes work together.
So the goal of our collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, was to empower the students to delve not only into the issues around pervasive racial injustice in the criminal justice system, but also to better understand how their disciplinary knowledge can help to address a real-world problem. And so the students together, the criminology students and the software engineering students were in teams together, and they were required to propose, design, and develop web-based applications that would further the mission of the organization. And all the projects needed to revolve around the central theme of racial injustice. And in order to provide a common foundation for the students, particularly the software engineering students for whom this is not a discipline that they may not be familiar with, Maggie actually facilitated a lecture discussion at the beginning of the semester on the history of racism in the United States prison system. And we pointed the students to a number of resources and webinars, TED Talks, etc., where they could learn more about the issues. and those were the slides that I quickly skipped over. And then this semester, we're actually just finishing up grading the projects that our students developed for a different community partner. Again, software engineering with penology students.
Right. This semester, our community partner was the Atlantic Center for Capital Representation. So looking at death penalty cases primarily in Pennsylvania.
And so what we found, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, so what we found is that the model, the collaborating across boundaries model, empowered students to engage more deeply in their disciplinary content and to understand a little bit more about the other discipline from the students who they were working with. Sorry, it's a bit disconnected because we kind of skipped over some of this.
Well, thank you for adding that detail. I see we have a question in the chat. Would you like to just ask the question, Dr. Ford?
Sure. I was really just about to bring up all my questions I had already written down somewhere. I know Tim had a couple questions before me as well. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll tag Tim first. Where I go on.
So you talked about your student achieving outcomes. Recently, I got placed on a task force to talk about teaching diversity and ethics inside computer science. And one of the things we got hit with was, and how will you measure the success? So when you say your students achieve, Margaret and Machina, when you say your students succeeded on teaching outcomes, how did you measure their ethicness?
So we used a number of different ways to look at that. So as part of the CAB model and the research study for NSF, students had to complete a pre-test and a post-test that had been developed and has been validated. And so we use those results, but then we're also looking at within our own disciplines. We have our regular tests and assignments and the project grade itself, and how well the students are addressing each of the issues that we had, that were part of our individual courses. So really, I was teaching my software engineering course independently of Maggie teaching her penology course. So the students came together during class time, maybe about 5 times during the semester. And the rest of the time, they were expected to meet outside of class and, basically bring their course knowledge, their own course knowledge to the project. And so we were assessing within our courses what they are learning. And then if you're talking about ethics and those kinds of things, I mean, I cover those topics as part of my software engineering class. I have questions, exams, and even for the project-related questions where they are addressing these issues. I don't know if that answers your question.
Are your materials online?
Yes, so much of what we have talked about is all in the paper. There are more details and a little bit more about the study. The website that we've linked on this page that has links to other courses that are also following this model, and that interactive story map tells more about the model. And and if you need any more resources that you don't find there, please do reach out to us. Our emails are there, and we're happy to share any. I see you found something.
Awesome. I'd be happy to ask my follow-up question now, Anne, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, since we're still talking about Margaret and Monisha's paper, great talk. This work is really interesting and necessary. Um,
Thank you.
as you can tell from Tim, and maybe even heard some of the conversation Tim and I were having before we started the conversation, the presentations. There's been a lot of questions about how software engineering researchers should be engaging with scientists in this space, or should be engaging with community partners. Do you have recommendations for those software engineering researchers or practitioners who are trying to figure out how to do more meaningful community-based work? Do you have recommendations on how they should be partnering with community partners in a respectful way that still honors participants? I think that's a big conversation that folks are having.
That's a great question. So on our campus, we have a Center for Community Engagement, and I think that's becoming increasingly common across many institutions. So way back when I wanted to start, I wanted to delve into mass incarceration. That was a social issue that had particular interest for me. And I went to the community, the Center for Community Engagement, and I asked them who on my campus is working in this area, and they pointed me to Maggie. So that's how the two of us connected. And then they helped connect us to the campaign to end the new Jim Crow. And then as it turned out, Maggie had already worked kind of with the person who is the president of that organization. So she had a relationship with them. And then even this semester's community partner, Maggie had a relationship with that organization as well, because this is her research area. And so she had that. Now, in terms of how can software engineering researchers get involved, I think working with the Center for Community Engagement, if you have one, that is a really good start. They do a lot of workshops and things and training sessions to help, and they will work one-on-one with faculty to work with community partners. And it's very important, as you mentioned, work with them respectfully. And we also talk to our students about their interactions with the community partner. And it is really centered around needs that are identified by the community partner, not needs that we decide they should have. And I think in both semesters, Maggie, you can correct me, but I think both semesters, our community partners were very impressed with how well the students responded to their requirements and their needs. I think it's a great way for our students to learn about even just requirements gathering in terms of software engineering, right?
And just to add on to what Monisha said, so when we met with our partner for the first collaboration that we're presenting on tonight, and then also the one that we just did, we came to them, open to whatever ideas or whatever help that they needed for particular areas, right? So when we talked about this a lot, that we didn't see it as, or approaching it as community service, but community engagement, and wanting to make sure that it was beneficial to the community partner, in addition to being beneficial to our students as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point too, that we don't use the term service learning or community service with this. This is a collaboration, and it is about the community.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for your interest.
I believe we have another question for Rashina.
I'm sorry, Anne, it was kind of breaking up in the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying I think you had another question for Rashina.
I did. I'm full of questions today.
Well, please go ahead. I mean, there's a very, there aren't a lot of questions queued, so please go ahead.
Sure. So Rashina, I really like this idea of this socio-technical research needs socio-technical methods, right? So I was curious how, and I think you may have started to answer in the chat, I didn't get to see. But I was wondering if you can give examples of how researchers may have been able to use your framework, at what stage they can start engaging with it to start forming how they're going to be conducting studies, or so I'm just curious on the feedback you received so far.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Darren. And I guess the funny part is a lot of what I've been doing and what some of my research teams have been doing, especially in the recent past, have been SDGT studies. So now we've got a label for it, and now we can start calling it SDGT studies. So it's kind of discovering that we have indeed the way software engineering researchers, as socio-technical researchers, when we take something from sociology, like grounded theory, and apply it to software, understanding software engineering, we inevitably adapt it, right? We do these tweaks, we apply it in a special way, we apply it to study things that sociologists may not be looking at. So for example, we apply it to study the whole socio-technical context, not just the social aspects, right? And that's basically what's prompted me to kind of define it as a unique thing that we do, and make kind of label the obvious, if you like. And now it's got a label, so we can start with these grounded theory studies in software engineering. I'm hoping that people can go to the SDGT method and look at it and try to use that directly in their work, instead of trying to also decipher some of what the sociological or the traditional grounded theory papers have been, or books have been, unfortunately a little bit difficult to parse for non-sociologists. So that's that. And in terms of using it, so yeah, a number of, as I said, the recent ones we've done have been SDGT, but I've put in the chat a couple of links to 2 papers in particular that have used it in a limited context. Because again, one of the issues that I've seen with researchers, software engineering researchers over time, is that they may not want to sign up to the whole process of theory development, right? But they do still have a lot of qualitative data to make sense of. So this is where you can use SDGT for data analysis as a technique, and just apply it to make sense of the qualitative data that you have. So these are a couple of papers I put in here. There's one of my PhD student, Kashumi, who's looking at emotions of software engineers as they work through requirement changes. And the other one is, again, a PhD student, Dulaji, who's looking at the influence of human aspects in requirements engineering. So both of them in the Humanize Lab at Monash with Professor John Grundy. So these are 2, but there are more coming. And more importantly, I'm always keeping track on who else outside of our lab is starting to use it, which is really exciting. So I'm hoping people start using it, and then definitely open to feedback, because this is a journey that we're on together and trying to improve it as we go. So yeah, use it. Let me know how you find it, and we can, tweak and make it better.
Well, let's just take these sequentially. So please continue. I think you had a question for Matthew.
Yeah, I took a look at the question. I think it's, I guess you're asking about the architecture more or less of the open domain chatbot. There wasn't really much space in fitting that within 5 minutes. So yeah, I sort of glossed over that. But yeah, I pulled up a slide to better explain the architecture a bit. Yeah, so the chatbot is actually connected to a search engine. In our case, we did Google. It actually takes 2 parallel paths. It has a long-term memory component, and it also searches the internet. With this internet search, it actually takes the top 5 search results and aggregates any information within the top 5 results in conjunction with this long-term memory, and concatenates that together for a response. So yeah, it's pretty, it was actually built with the intent of being more interactive and based. So it's very chatty, but it does use like the top 5 search results in its backend. I'm not sure if that helped.
Matthew?
Yes.
Just because it's in the news, I'll just ask the trite question. Any chance that your device is going to do the Microsoft racist Twitter bot effect? Does it adapt to feedback from the users, and can that drive it to a bad place?
It very well can. Yeah, we actually did see that. I guess it's really depending on the conversation context. If the participant becomes frustrated with the lack of providing good results, it could very well direct the conversation in a way that's not appropriate for our task. So yeah, we did see that.
Okay.
The chatbot does have its own.
Could you comment also? I see you've got two knowledge sources: the general search engine and your own long-term memory. I wonder how you came to that architecture. Is that just a standard thing in the field? And have you tried turning off one of those two sources and seeing the effects on the?
That's not something that we built. That is the state of the art that was built by Facebook Research in August last year. So we didn't really manipulate any of the state of the art. We actually just added software engineering word embeddings to guide the conversation more in a software engineering focus rather than turning on and off any of the existing state of the art.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a question from Igor in the chat.
I think Igor said he can't come off mute, so I'll just read the question out loud for folks who may not have been able to see it. So the question was for me. He asked, have you investigated, so Danae, have you investigated the role of Hofstede's cultural dimensions in your study? I'm curious to understand if masculinity and power distance dimensions have an influence over the diversity somehow. So we actually, for our study, we did not use Hofstede's cultural dimensions. However, this conversation came up quite a bit in designing the study. We were kind of really intentional because we wanted to start out with a more of a blank slate and think about how different countries are engaging overall. So being at Microsoft's LOL at Tim Menzies' comment earlier about Tay, but we've been trying to think about how can we really start from ground zero rather than kind of typecast some countries on how they're engaging in open source. I know that there have been additional studies from Christoph Troida and others as well, looking at the range of contributions and where they're coming from. I can talk a little bit about the countries that were really standing out a little bit. I kind of started to highlight them in my talk, and maybe I'll reshare my screen again just to show that for a bit. But we did start to see around who was interested in getting paid and where they were coming from, right? So a lot of the lower, ideally lower resourced countries were a lot more interested in funding for their work. And actually getting paid. This also included when we started thinking about conversations about women as well, thinking about how they're getting compensated for their work. So something that we don't talk about often enough is how open source contributions are more than just people who are doing it for volunteer, right? People are often contribute, and more so, and it's being talked about more in other settings at GitHub and others, how we're funding those who are contributing, because a lot of large organizations and tech companies become dependent on open source. So it's important that we highlight the thankful work, or the work that has previously been thankless. And I mentioned a little bit about the geographic distribution on incentivized pay. We did see that outside of Africa, which I said had a larger interest in being paid for their motivation, we saw less of that in Europe and in the Americas as well. This could likely be because in Europe and in the Americas, there are already strong mechanisms for paying software development at a higher rate per hour, different salary incentives. We know that there are definitely more advantages for developers in those regions as far as compensation than others. So we hope that understanding this, or at least really starting with this kind of framing of how people are excited to contribute, motivated to contribute, we could probably start to build a new Hofstede framework, because it has gotten a lot of critique as well.
Could I ask a follow-up kind of question?
Yes, sure.
So again, as part of my software engineering class, I do try to encourage students to, look at open source software. But the question always comes up about the volunteer versus paid, right? So do you have suggestions for resources that I can point students to more about getting involved, certainly as a volunteer, but also for paid opportunities to be involved in open source? Because I think that, I personally believe in open source. So.
Yeah, and I can actually give you an opportunity at the intersection of some of the social good work you mentioned earlier. So outside of the paper presented, I have been working in open source for social good and helping maintainers reduce the load of who's coming to their projects, helping contributors identify projects to work on that satisfy a social impact, aligned with like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? So projects where people can say, for example, of a project is um, people identifying safe restrooms. So there's a project called Refuge Restrooms, which is open source to help non-binary, intersex folks, or genderqueer folks identify safe restrooms in their region. And these are projects that are looking for open source contributions. However, the issue is they can't figure out where to go. So GitHub social impact page does house a list of pages. OVO.org is one as well that we've used as a source for our study when we were trying to figure out how to best support the contributors and as well as the maintainers. And I can link some of the paper to those in the chat as well, because all the resources are there as well. And then the Digital Public Goods Alliance is working on this nomination process where you can list projects that are aligned to a broader social impact, again, aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, such as helping people identify clean water, identifying civil structures, identifying doctors. The safe restrooms was another one, but intimate partner violence was another one that we were looking at. And these are examples of ones that we know for sure excite marginalized folks. So thinking about CS Ed settings, what empowers people to join computing sciences, what empowers women, non-binary folks, people of color to engage. You want to see if those same things exist in open source. But I think the issue is people don't know how to find them. So we're trying to figure out ways to do that. And I can link some of those as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, and then outside of social good types of open source projects, there are several good first issue pages. Mozilla has a couple as well. Hacktoberfest is like the busy one. They're used to people having their one-day flies of contributing once and then leaving forever. But there are also other sustainable opportunities too. So there's a range, and I can link those.
Great.
Question for Rashina. Your SEIS 2023. Is that a NICSE workshop or?
That's one of the tracks, Tim. So software engineering in society.
Excellent.
So a lot of the conversation we're having today, I think many of these papers and the kinds of work and topics can quite easily fit into the SEIS banner. And next year, we're focusing especially on connecting different communities, especially interdisciplinary research. So, and of course, our continued focus on societal impact.
Very good. So Srikanth has a question about bias. One unfortunate conclusion from our work is that if you get around to asking people technical questions about what they believe in and what they think should be done or not done, the basis for those beliefs is very weak. So if we lean in and ask people what they want, they'll tell you, even if the basis for that is not strong. So I understand. Well, I'll just leave it at that. How do we make technology approachable, auditable when it's a group decision process?
So one thing that I do in the stand-up meetings that I have every day is I wear this T-shirt that says Dwight Schrute false, because everybody says, I think, in my experience, the cleaner the code, the easy to review. And some other person says, I think this, I think that. But the pull request keeps getting delayed. So the time to write the code takes 1 day. The time for the pull request to get accepted takes 3-4 days. And much of is driven by these beliefs. And I get tired. And the other day I just pinged my own papers link in the team. And this is not just the problem with my organization, right? The people that they work with me are from different organizations, and we carry a lot of, and it's easy to change and convince them to some extent, but not a lot of extent. But beyond this, we still have bias, unconscious bias. So we try to do that. This doesn't mean that we are bad people, but it's just that that's probably the next thing in human aspects, or one of the next things in human aspects to sort of thing. So that's just a view that I wanted to share.
Yeah, I had a similar sort of musing as Tim kind of pointed out, which was to do with it's really great to have interdisciplinary teams and to have people from various backgrounds come together and share perspectives to try and solve a problem together. But inevitably, with diversity of thought and experiences, you will have conflict. So what is our approach to conflict management in these groups to try and get anything done?
There's a great quote from Joseph Weizenbaum from the 60s. He said, "We thought with communication everyone would understand each other." But I think the lesson of the 21st century is that we communicate more, we actually discover our core differences. So how do we go to negotiation spaces where I'm willing to give up part of what I want?
That's interesting, and that leads me to think about marriage. More you communicate for decades.
I think we'll throw to the audience and ask for their opinion.
That's conflict management for like 24/7 for 50 years plus, potentially.
So I know there are still a few minutes, but
Yeah, sorry, the session was good. They kept asking questions. And I was trying to pull people to come here.
I was just going to say that
Yeah, oh, you saw that. Okay. Yeah, I was like, wait, which one is this one?
I think
And everyone's
many
like,
of
oh,
us.
it's tough for the other one. I was like, Miriam?
I think Danae has still got her mic open. She hasn't left this room.
Mic on.
God bless her. Bless her heart.
I am. So I was going to say that I think we might need to switch over to the next room.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry about this, but let's just reconvene in room 1.
See ya.
Thank you.